Hello and welcome to the True London podcast. I'm Dave Hill, publisher and editor of the journalism website onlondon.co.uk. Our subject today is London's housing emergency in all its many dimensions, and whether any serious progress is being made towards ending it. My guest today is Dan Reast, Senior Research Officer with think tank Centre for London. Dan, welcome. Coming up, perhaps in June, we have a consultation on the new London plan, which is the Mayor's master blueprint for the city's evolution. So let's keep that in mind as we talk. Last year, some big things happened. Emergency measures were agreed with the Secretary of State, Steve Reed, to get London building again. There was that announcement about 2 new towns in London. But there was also a lot of gloom, including about the slow progress of building safety regulation. So Dan, my first question is a very simple one. Is there anything to be cheerful about?
Thanks, Dave. It is a very difficult question because unfortunately, as many Londoners will know, the housing emergency is one of its most pressing issues. I think perhaps one of the most perhaps positive ways to look at the London housing crisis is there's an awful lot of ambition, and that ambition is generally very, very cooperative now. In previous years, where there have been some competing challenges around the role of affordable housing or whether supply should be going ahead at the rate it is, by and large, London stakeholders are speaking from the same hymn sheet when it comes to the housing emergency. There's obviously going to be different aspects to it around how far housing associations can play a part in it, or to what extent home ownership is really important in London. But certainly on the supply question, everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet. So that's really positive. But I would say, unfortunately, on lots of other metrics, there are some really difficult challenges for London, and your introduction certainly laid that pretty bare as well.
Okay, so let's have a look at some particular items. So we have this stuff from Steve Reed, with Sadiq Khan, various changes that could be made to make it easier for private developers to actually basically afford to get stuff going again. I mean, that was what it was about. And there was a bit of hullabaloo about the mayor reducing his threshold target for the percentage of affordable homes in private sector schemes from 35 to 20%. And a lot of people were very cross about that. But other people thought, well, 20% is better than no percent, which is what we're getting at the moment. There were those kinds of debates. And there were other elements of those emergency measures. So are those things beginning to come into effect? Are we seeing anything changing on the ground?
So it's a tricky one because we're still waiting for those measures to be implemented. They'll be required to be implemented at the London level through London plan guidance, and at the national level, likely through secondary legislation or through introduction through other planning guidance. So the likelihood is we might not see those measures implemented until later this year. And certainly one of the big criticisms of that emergency measure package has been that it's perhaps come a bit too late in the day. It's time limited as it is, around maybe 2.5 years for that kind of those restrictions to be lifted, if you like. And one of the key things about it as well is that the emergency measures would only apply up until the point when a new London plan is in place. So considering in June, as you mentioned, Dave, the London plan is going to be consulted on in its first full draft, the likelihood is that the emergency measures package might not actually last its full tenure. So there's some competing challenges there, and I think a lot of there's a bit of a culture war as to whether it's going to have any effect, to be quite honest. The reduction in the affordable housing percentage from 35 to 20% to access this fast track planning, this planning route from the GLA, the large community of developers and housing associations would say, yes, 20% of something is better than absolutely nothing. It's worth saying that even when 35% has been the goal at a London-wide level, London's affordable housing totals has never really reached 35%. And even now, when 35% is the goal, you're very unlikely to get 35% in a housing development unless it's unlocked through a partnership with a housing association or through the grants which the central government provides through the GLA. On the ground, it's not really being seen. would say.
Okay. And I think there are some there's a bit of flexibility being built into the existing London plan, isn't there, in terms of what developers aren't going to be asked to provide. Is that? Can you tell us a bit about that? I mean, I think there's something about dual aspect or single aspect. How many bits of the sides of a home you can look out of, and about cycle storage provision. There were a few things. Can you remind us about those?
Absolutely. So there's three sort of big design features which I would say that London's housing community, development community, have really been lobbying to kind of resolve as part of the design guidance. One is, as you said, cycle storage, reducing the overall amount which large developments have to provide in a block. There's also the dual aspect part of it, which is essentially having a window on one side and a window on the other side of your housing development, which obviously, if you're in a flat block, reduces the amount you can actually deliver as part of one building. So that's that's really important for some developers. And then there's this real this much broader issue of second staircases, which has been a real discussion point for a lot of developers and indeed the government since it was brought in guidance a few years ago, and that was under the Conservative government as well. That's being relaxed through the emergency measures. It'll be interesting to see whether the London plan really does drop the expectation to have second staircases. It has been cited by lots of housing developers as blocking a lot of homes because to deliver the quantity which is needed under the housing targets, you need to build tall. And if you build tall, you need a second staircase, reducing the amount of space you have. So it's quite technical. It's quite an issue for some developers. And it all runs into that issue of building safety regulation, as you said.
Yes, right, exactly. So that's what I was going to say. Just briefly recap for people to bring them up to speed with the second staircase. This was a thing, basically. After Grenfell, it was decided that there had to be more staircases in blocks of flats above a certain level, and of course there have been a number of planning consents for developments given which didn't have that provision, and so what were you going to do about that? And it was all rather complicated. And you're saying now, well, possibly, and we don't know, that provision might be relaxed or even done away with. Is that
Yeah, I think relaxed is definitely the way of putting it. I think that certainly the GLA and the government are keen to keep as much building safety regulation in as possible. It's absolutely a mandate which is needed. I think it's the flexibility is going to be really key,
okay?
Especially for those legacy blocks, which, as you mentioned, blocks which have already got planning approval but haven't potentially started. There's quite a few in London where they now have to build a second staircase. So that flexibility will certainly play into that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Now, we touched upon housing associations and the role that they play in making affordable homes within commercial developments, for want of a better word. They've had their own set of problems with finances, and also I think a couple of weeks ago, bids for the mayor's next. It's now called the Social and Affordable Homes Programme, I think. This is money that the government gives you. This is going back to Angela Rayner, remember her. Quite a nice lump of money given to the mayor, and basically housing associations and councils can put in bids for that money, and that bidding process has now begun. So are you able to tell us, how cheerful are housing associations and councils at the moment? Are they rushing forward to put forward bids to get this money, given that they're actually been finding it quite difficult to build anything as things stand?
I think councils will certainly be much more optimistic around getting bids, because that aspect which you mentioned of the changing of the title from the Affordable Homes Programme, which it has been for 10 to 12 years or so, to now social and affordable homes, has really changed the way in which the AHP will be delivered. More social homes, a higher percentage of social homes as a block. So councils will want to leverage that much more. I think housing associations in general, the sector is in a pretty optimistic mood generally. They've received a number of policy changes which are really benefiting them and getting them back to that level of financialization, which they can actually do something like supply, because they've been really hindered by the building safety regimes as well, where a lot of their money, which they've got through rents, has been spent on remediating these legacy building safety issues, and that's cost a lot of money, and it hasn't enabled them to actually build more social homes. So there's certainly the grant, which will be accessed by members of the G15 and others, will be really beneficial to them. But other policy asks from them, such as rent convergence, so that London social housing providers can have a parity of social rents compared to the rest of the country. That's really crucial. That's going to make those social housing providers much more financially able to do the day-to-day and deliver.
Right, that's very interesting, because I wrote a piece about rent convergence because I had no idea what it meant. And I thought,
Yes.
well, one way to find out is to talk to some people who do and then write an article about it. And it was, a bracing and improving experience for me. But I can see why it's important. It's basically bringing social rents up to comparable levels for comparable kinds of homes, because for various reasons some have lagged behind. That's a very crude way of putting it, but that's tremendously helpful, as I discovered, to the finances of.
Definitely, it provides the health, I think, of the pipeline for a lot of social housing providers who, outside of London, where they have perhaps the same or perhaps a higher rent level, which they can have for the same home, essentially, whereas in central London or wherever, where housing costs are much higher, the cost of delivering, repairs and maintenance is much higher. It's not on pair, so it needs to be made more convergent, as I said.
Okay, well that's another bit of cheerful stuff. Well done, Dan. I know it's
Yes.
I know it's not I know it's not easy, but that's good. Okay, so now let's look at the new towns, and there were two were sort of near the top of the list, or one right at the top of the list was this Cruise Hill site, where there are currently a lot of garden centres in the north of Enfield, and boy, is that a hot political potato with the borough elections coming up. And the other one was Thamesmead, and we've also Transport for London is there is now an arrangement for TfL to raise the money it needs to bring the Docklands Light Railway south of the river and into Thamesmead, which is a vital transport infrastructure for such a housing development to take place. So that's kind of good. But this is very anecdotal, Dan, but a few people I've been speaking to around the place have been saying, well, we had this big announcement about new towns, whenever it was, late last summer. And has anything actually happened? What's going on? Where's the action? Where's the fanfare? Where's the progress? Can you help us with that?
Yes, I can answer some, also anecdotally, but discussing with developers and housing associations is there's not a lot of movement, to be fair. Largely that's because the way in which the New Towns programme was announced was the independent commission, which advised the government on what the sites would be. It's totally within the government's gift to say, actually, we don't want any of these sites, we're going to pick something else. The two sites in London, as you said, Thamesmead and Cruise Hill and Chase Park, they are pretty much oven ready when it comes to the land itself. Thamesmead has been mooted as a place to build 50,000 homes for probably more than 3 decades. Extending the DLR will massively help that, and it's very good that the TfL have now got that facility to actually deliver that. The Enfield new town will be much harder because it's all about having access to the Great Northern Rail line and TfL to have an overground line, essentially. Without that infrastructure, that's going to be very tricky to sell because it's, in the London context, it's relatively remote. As you said, lots of garden centres, lots of spaces where, typically you wouldn't expect to see big housing developments. Short answer, there's not a lot going on. They're still doing a lot of internal discussions at CLG around, is this the right kind of priority? It's also the case that there's this issue of, do we really want to build new towns in London where we've got other new towns have been suggested elsewhere where we can put our efforts in? Lots going on in Cambridge and Oxford as we speak, and I think that's probably where the priority is going to be.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, dear. That's a bit gloomy. You're depressing me again now, Dan.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's been a roller coaster ride. I was very struck when I got wind of the fact that Cruise Hill, this sort of fairly distant location, was going to be named recommended as a site. I went out there and I got the train there, and it was one of those moments that you get in parts of outer London that are very, very close to the home counties, that it sort of doesn't think it's really part of Greater London. And there's actually a signpost at the station, very kind of sleepy little station, saying trains to London this way. I say, hey, we're already here. Didn't you know?
Yes.
So there is that kind of psychology about that area as well, perhaps more so than with Thamesmead, whereas there's been a lot of development and redevelopment going on for a while.
Definitely. I think the political will to develop both is absolutely there. And Enfield Council are really keen to develop both Cruise Hill and Chase Park as vibrant new communities. As you said, it'd be very interesting to see what happens at borough elections, whether that impacts any of the results. When it comes to Thamesmead, because it's got that sort of bordering Bexley and Greenwich, there's a real interesting impact of what that could be. But as you said, it's been mooted as a place for development and regeneration ever since its first regeneration all those years ago. So that's probably more oven ready. And if I was the minister, I'd be banking on Thamesmead probably more than Enfield.
All right. Well, that's really interesting insight. Thanks very much. So we can be reasonably hopeful, but maybe not expect anything too much too soon. Reasonable, fair.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment.
Okay, thanks. And so last thing, London Council's that fine organisation that represents all of the capital's local authorities, has been sending out for a long time lots of very worrying information about homelessness, people being temporarily housed, the impacts that's having on the finances of the boroughs, and how acute the problem is. Is there any sense that, I'm just partly thinking about the fair funding review, we know from which some London boroughs gained and others didn't. I mean, are you able to give me a sort of very general overview of whether the boroughs are able to get a bit more of a grip on this difficult problem, or is it one we're stuck with for a while?
I think the fair funding review will absolutely help, especially outer London boroughs who have been hit quite substantially hard because they haven't had this level of this impact from homelessness and especially non-rough sleeping, the kind of homelessness where you need temporary accommodation, you need the quantity of temporary accommodation sites. So for outer London boroughs, absolutely, with the fair funding review, it's going to make a difference. It's the challenge of London really to enable working together in a really good way on temporary accommodation. And there's been some fantastic stuff which London Council has done and individual boroughs are doing. It's just unfortunate these stories around having to move up to Liverpool or other parts of the country because there just isn't enough capacity in London. And so, Centre for London has been calling for much more coordination across the boroughs and across different providers, so that if there is a homelessness crisis in local government, that they can be dealt with in London. That capacity will be helped by the fair funding review. It's hopeful that there will be a revised homelessness strategy coming from CLG any month soon. That could also see some new money, but it's certainly one of those ongoing challenges where you have so many different services which are disconnected and disjointed at a local and regional national level that there needs to be a grip on it. And I think that's certainly something that we would recommend as a think tank.
Okay, yes. So often with these big London problems, the real answer is getting the right people around the right table at the right time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, on that terribly wise note, thank you so much, Dan. That's a brilliant summary of some of the big things in the housing emergency. Do join us again, because I know that Centre for London has got some big stuff on housing. Just tell us quickly about that coming up in the next couple of months.
Yes, that's right. So we have a comprehensive report into the housing crisis coming up in May, June time, which will look at the real structural challenges of London's housing crisis. So everything from house prices to private rents to a little bit of homelessness as well. So really comprehensive and hopefully getting some good support as well.
Okay, well, I hope very much you'll be able to come back and talk to me again about that when it comes out.
Absolutely.
For the meantime, though, great to see you. Lovely to hear from you. Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you, everybody, for paying attention. Goodbye.